This luncheon is none other than John McManus. Probably, he needs no introduction in this room, but for the sake of the millions might be watching on YouTube and on all these other video programs and cable TV stations around the world, John McManus is the president of the John Birch Society. He is from Brooklyn, New York. Went to college at Holy Cross. Spent time in the Marine Corps captain. He worked for the. He's been on the staff of the John Birch Society since the early '60s. He served in almost every capacity possible, from field coordinator to public relations man to spokesman, and now president of the John Birch Society. He's author of numerous books. He's the editor of our magazine, The New American. And this topic deals with the economy, which I think is a very important topic, with the price of gas going over $4 and home foreclosures at an all-time high. So let's give a nice warm hand to John McManus.
Thank you, Hal. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you're done with your lunch and you want to pick up your chair and turn it around and face this way so you don't get a crick in your neck, please do so. I always like to start off with a little story, and I heard about a fellow who was a barber in his community, and a man came in, a local florist came in for a haircut one day, and he got his haircut, and then the barber said, "No charge this week." He said, "It's a public service. We're giving out free haircuts for everybody." And the guy said, "That's terrific." So the next morning, a nice little plant and a thank you note waiting for him at the door when he got there. And the second day, a fella came in and he ran a local pizza place. And he got his hair cut. He wanted to pay, same thing. No, for public service, nobody pays this week. And so he was very grateful. And the next morning, he sent over some pizzas for everybody to come in. He had a piece of pizza and so on. He was very grateful as well. Next day, a congressman came in. The congressman got his free haircut. And he was going to, no, nobody's paying this week. Everybody's free. Okay, fine. And the fourth day, there were 10 more congressmen. Well, we want to do a little common sense about the U.S. economy. And I'll start off by saying that if he were alive today, Karl Marx would delight in the creation of and the work of the Federal Reserve. Now, we hear a lot of laments. We hear people saying, it costs more every time I go to the supermarket. And the guy says, my pay raise doesn't even keep pace with rising costs. Somebody else would say, two incomes barely keep pace with the rising cost of everything. Another one says, college tuition's out of sight. They get the bill and they think they want me to buy the place. I just want to send a child. Of course, we all know what it's like to go and try to fill up your car. There's an unfortunate, woeful lack of understanding about all of what's happening. You will talk to an ordinary American and he'll say, "You mean there's no backing for the dollar?" Another one would say, "What is the Federal Reserve and how does it affect me?" Another one would say, "Well, we need the Fed because somebody has to manage the currency." Well, if you want to manage the currency, then you're in trouble. So during the lifetime of many Americans, certainly many of us here, the United States has gone from the greatest creditor nation with the most respected currency to the greatest debtor nation with an increasingly shunned currency. Now, I have here before me a piece of paper and it says on it $1. You're all familiar with that. I have here a lump of silver. This is a silver dollar. It also says $1. Now, this $1 will get you a quart of gasoline. This $1 will get you 12 quarts, 3 gallons or more, depending on the quality of your silver dollar. Now, how can that be? Isn't a dollar a dollar? Well, we're getting to a point here we're going to be talking about. What has happened is, because there is no limit in the amount of paper, there are more dollars of this kind in circulation. And that's what inflation is. Inflation is not rising prices. Inflation is an increase in the quantity of currency that lowers the value of the currency. And that's why you see prices going up when really it's not anything more than a realization that the dollar has gone down. Except that it's not a realization on the part of most people. In 1920, a British socialist named John Maynard Keynes wrote a book, and in his book, he spoke some truth, enduring truth. He said, by a continuous process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. He said the process engages all of the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does so in a manner that not one man in a million can diagnose. That's absolutely true. So how does inflation work? Well, when you flood the country with these paper dollars, and all paper dollars become less valuable, that means your savings account is no longer worth what it used to be. Where did that value go? According to John Maynard Keynes, his accurate statement, it was confiscated by government in a process that not one man in a million can diagnose. Well, thanks to the John Birch Society, a lot more than 1 million in our country are able to diagnose it, but not enough still to put a stop to it. So inflation is thievery. It will steal the value of your savings. It will steal the value of your retirement funds. It will steal the value of whatever you might have. Consider a fellow who in 1945, at the end of World War II, he had an inheritance. He inherited $10,000. Now he could have bought a home in 1945 for $10,000. Now what did he do with his $10,000? He put it in the mattress. He didn't trust the banks. He put it in the mattress. Now, in the year 2005, we'll say, he went, that's what, 60 years later, he went and he got his $10,000 out from the mattress, and he couldn't even put a down payment on a house. Where did the value of his $10,000 go? It was confiscated from him by government. Now, inflation is thievery, but it also can destroy a nation. Henry Hazlitt was a prominent economist in our country, a worthwhile economist. In 1946, he wrote a book, and in his book he said, inflation tears apart the whole fabric of stable economic relationships. He said it drives men toward desperate remedies. He continued, it leads men to demand totalitarian controls. It ends invariably in bitter disillusion and collapse. Right? Now, do we have any examples of that happening in history? Yes, indeed. At the end of World War I, the Versailles Treaty put tremendous burdens on the German people. And one of the burdens was they had to pay reparations for the damage that had been done during World War I. Enormous amounts of money were demanded of the German people. So what did the government do? The government inflated the currency and paid off what it was supposed to pay with increasingly less worthy, less worthwhile Reichsmarks. Now, I don't suppose you can see this other than have me show you, but here's an example of what happened in Germany. At the top of the chart, we see it's January of 1922, 1 Reichsmark, $1 would get you 189 Reichsmarks. Right? And as they continued to print the Reichsmarks, you can see as we go down here to mid-1924, $1 would now be the equivalent of trillions of Reichsmarks. And so they revalued the currency. And they came out with a new Reichsmark, which was now 1. Well, unfortunately, there was a man in the United States. He lived in Portland, Oregon. And in 1925, he wrote to a bank in Germany. He wrote to the Deutsche Bank in Germany, and he asked what happened to his 1 million Reichsmarks that he had in the bank. They wrote back this letter to him, and I won't read the whole letter. It said that on December 31st, your account showed a paper balance, 1 million, in your favor, and as this amount cannot be expressed in the smallest units of the new currency, a conversion is impossible. All right, get this. The balance on your account has in fact been wiped out. Right? Right? There goes his 1 million Deutschmarks that he had in the bank, and when he put them in the bank, they were probably worth something. But it has now been wiped out. Now, so how can this happen? Well, it can happen when you get away from a commodity being used as money. If we go back over history, we find some interesting commodities have been used for money. We find, for instance, cattle were used as money. And the fact of the matter is, a commodity has to be the money. If this is not a commodity, right? A piece of paper, well, I suppose you could call it a commodity, but it's a worthless thing. There's no limit on those. So they had cattle, they had seashells were money. They had salt. In fact, the word salary comes from salt. Right? Nails were money. Tobacco was money. Now they had built-in problems. The cattle had to be fed, and you couldn't divide up the cattle for small transactions. You'd kill the cow. The seashells were fragile and would break, and therefore they weren't worth as much anymore. The salt was easy to find, and you could inflate the money supply when it was salt. Nails rusted and were used in construction. And so they stopped being used. Tobacco rotted. So the wisdom of history, and this wasn't decided by any government leader, any guru, the wisdom of history has decided that precious metals should be the money. Gold, especially, and silver. Why gold? It's divisible, it's transportable, it's durable, it's scarce. And silver, ditto. Same thing, not as well as gold, but certainly. So, in our country, the war for independence was financed by the Continental Congress, and they issued currency. They called it the Continentals. There was no backing for the Continentals. In fact, they became worthless, and it gave rise to a phrase that was used in our country. I can even remember my own parents using it, not worth a Continental. They weren't talking about that beautiful automobile there, the Lincoln Continental. They were talking about that. So finally, after the War for Independence, founding fathers got together and they decided to put out a Constitution. 1787, we got the Constitution. What did the Constitution say about money? Well, Article 1, Section 8 says, Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. Okay, so let's look at that, all right? Had the power to coin money. You can't coin paper. What did they mean by that? They meant Congress had the power to establish a mint to stamp the people's precious metals into coinage of a fixed size, weight, and purity. In fact, if you went to the mint that was finally established and you asked them to coin your gold or your silver, and you had to hurry, they would charge you to do it. It was free for others if you waited, but if you were in a hurry, they would charge you something. So the power to coin money was simply the power to establish a mint, right? Now, to regulate the value thereof, well, regulate the value and fix the standard of weights and measures. What did that mean? Well, the coinage was going to be of a fixed size, weight, and purity so that commerce could flourish. Everybody would know. You would know that this silver dollar has silver in it. You would know that a gold coin had the same thing. And it was a fixed, there weren't 7/8 ounces coins, and there weren't 0.62 ounce coins and so forth. There was a standard that they established so that it made it easy and then they would determine and publish the value of foreign coinage. The most popular coinage at the time of our founding fathers was Spanish pieces of 8. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but pieces of 8, they were all notched into 8 little bits, right? And if you took off 2 of those bits, you had a quarter. And that's where the phrase 2 bits came from. Okay? What else? Create a standard of weights and measures to facilitate transactions. That's the power that was given Congress in the Constitution of the United States. And that's all that was given. Now, you go on in the Constitution and you go to the next article and you see that there's some limitations on the states. Realize that the people who went from the different states to the Constitutional Convention were all very jealous guardians of state power. Okay? In fact, there were some people, of course, that wanted 13 individual countries. But then they decided for mutual protection and so forth, let's get together and we'll have a loose confederation. Right? That's how the Articles of Confederation started, and then, of course, they had their deficiencies, and then they came out with the Constitution. But what did the Constitution say about the states? All right? The Constitution says, no state shall coin money, emit bills of credit. Bills of credit, that's the term that they used for paper money. So no state shall coin money, no state shall issue bills of credit, and no state shall make anything but gold and silver a tender in payment of debts. Now, what they're talking about there is the debts to the state, the taxes and so forth. Right? You could not pay your taxes in anything but gold or silver. Right? They were jealous guardians. They banned paper money. They called it bills of credit, and only gold and silver were recognized. Now, the attitude of the Founding Fathers during this Constitutional Convention is quite remarkable. Right? Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut, he said, we must shut and bar the door against paper money. They had their experience with the Continentals. James Wilson of Pennsylvania said, remove the possibility of paper money. Pierce Butler of South Carolina said, disarming the government of such power is essential. And the guy from New Hampshire, John Langdon, he said, I would prefer to reject the entire Constitution if paper money is not barred. Right? That's how important he felt that whole subject was. Good for him. So, where are we in our country today? Well, let's go over and look at some of the currency that has been used here. I have pictures of these. I meant to make a PowerPoint presentation and put this all up on a screen so you could all see it, but couldn't get it done in time. But I have here a United States Treasury gold certificate, and it's dated 1907. Right? It says on it, right across the top, this certifies that there has been deposited in the Treasury of the United States of America $10 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. That's good paper money. Right? That is redeemable in gold. Okay? Obviously, we don't have that anymore. In 1933, President Roosevelt took us off the gold standard. And he had the American people turn in their gold. And he told them that they would get it back eventually as soon as we got out of the Depression. You know, it didn't happen. They didn't get their gold back. Right? I just can't imagine people lining up to give their gold away to the government for a piece of paper. They did. Right? So the next kind of money we had, again, this is a United States Treasury note. This is a silver certificate. And it says that right at the top, silver certificate. And then it says, this certifies there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. Again, good money. That particular one is dated 1935. That was a good year, Ed, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Ed and I are 1935. Now, we all know that the Federal Reserve started in 1913. I think we all know that. All right, it did. It started in 1913. And so when the Federal Reserve started issuing its paper money, it had to compete with gold certificates that were still in existence. So the first of the Federal Reserve notes that came out, and this one says across the top, Federal Reserve note, dated 1928, this particular one. It says, redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve bank. right? Competing at the time with gold certificates that were still circulating. That's 1928. Well, 1933, Roosevelt said no more. Right? So the next Federal Reserve note that came out, this one's 1934, right after we pulled the gold away. It says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the United States Treasury or at any Federal Reserve Bank. Redeemable in lawful money.
Yeah.
I love to tell the story about the fellow that went up to a bank and he had a $50 Federal Reserve note that said it was redeemable in lawful money. He gave it to the teller and he said, "I'd like some lawful money, please." And she said, "You want 5 10s or 10 5s or 51s or what is it you want?" No, I said, "No, what you would be giving me are bills that also say that they are redeemable in lawful money. And if they're redeemable in lawful money, they can't be lawful money. I'd like some lawful money, please." And she went and got the boss. Well, the boss came back and the boss said, "What can I do for you, sir?" I said, "I'd like some lawful money." Well, he ended up getting no satisfaction whatsoever. "What do you mean by lawful money?" He said, "Gold or silver." "No, I'm sorry." And take back his 50 and out the door he went. So they took that off the currency, and now if you look in the this one here, and the one that I've pictured here is a 1996. It says it's a Federal Reserve note, and all it says on it is, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, redeemable in nothing." And we have gone, in my lifetime, plus 2 years, from the finest paper money the world has ever known, the gold certificates, to completely irredeemable paper money, the amount of which, the value of which, and so forth, is just completely going out of business. Right? Now, every once in a while, you get a little help when you're trying to teach people these things. In January of 1993, National Geographic magazine came out and had an article, a very interesting article, called "The Power of Money." And in the article, the author, a man named Peter White, he talked about different kinds of money all around the world and the history of money and everything else. Then he went to the Federal Reserve. And he went to the Federal Reserve just as he had learned that the Federal Reserve had just purchased $100 million of stock. And so he asked the Fed official, "Where did the Fed get the $100 million? I'll read from the magazine. "We created it," a Fed official tells me. He means that anytime the central bank writes a check, so to speak, it creates money. The Fed official continued, "It's money that didn't exist before." So Mr. White asked the Fed official, "Is there any limit on that?" Get this answer. "No limit, only the good judgment and the conscience of the responsible Federal Reserve people." Sleep well.
Yeah.
"Where did they get this vast authority?" asks Mr. White, and the man says, "It was delegated to them in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, based on the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have the power to coin money." Well, Congress did have the power to coin money, but that has nothing to do with what the Federal Reserve is doing, and that's what they claim. Now, he went on to describe the process known as fractional reserve banking, which is another crime of its own kind. I won't get into it except to say that the banks in our country are allowed, by law, to lend out $9 for every one they have in the bank. And that's creating money all the time as well. And so they're partners with the Fed and the government. Okay, now let's go back to the Federal Reserve. In 1979, a man was appointed to be the head of the Federal Reserve. His name was Paul Volcker. He had the post for 8 years. He had joined the Council on Foreign Relations in 1970, so he was already one of the boys. He testified to Congress in 1979, and in that testimony he said this: "The standard of living of the average American has to decline. I don't think you can escape that." And so he went to work as the head of the Federal Reserve, helping to destroy the standard of living of the average American. He was succeeded in that post by a fellow named Alan Greenspan. Now, before Alan Greenspan became a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and before he became the head of the Federal Reserve, he was as great a hard money advocate as anybody could imagine. He even wrote a book called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal in 1967. And in that book he said this: "In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation." Alan Greenspan said that. Well, he became the head of the Federal Reserve right after Volcker, and he held the post for 20 years. He had, of course, joined the Council on Foreign Relations in 1978. I had a friend down in Pennsylvania, a longtime member of the Birch Society, who was a real student of all of this stuff, and very, very upset about what was happening. And so he wrote to his congressman, and he demanded to know what the Federal Reserve was doing and where did it get its authority to issue currency and so on and so on. Well, the congressman bumped the letter right over to Alan Greenspan. And Alan Greenspan wrote back to that congressman, citing the letter that had come from my friend. There's a copy of that letter. And I'll just read one portion of it here. It says, "Consequently, no state government may emit bills of credit or make anything but gold or silver a tender in payment of debts. But the federal government is not limited in what it may designate as legal tender." And what he's saying here is, because there was no specific prohibition against the federal government doing what they were doing with the Federal Reserve, there was no specific prohibition, they could go ahead and do it. See, the states were specifically prohibited from doing it, but the federal government wasn't. Now, that's a revolutionary attitude. If you believe that the federal government can do anything that is not specifically prohibited, you've increased the number of things it can do to 95% of all things, whereas if you go to the Constitution and say you can only do what you are allowed to do and given power to do, that's only 5% of things. You can see how revolutionary that attitude is. And yet, got away with it, and the congressman in Pennsylvania, he was satisfied. So the Federal Reserve started in 1913. It's an unelected few. It's appointed board of directors, serve at the president's behest. They're appointed by the president. There's a quasi-relationship there, but the Federal Reserve is totally independent. 14-year terms these guys get to be the members of the board of directors. And they've been awarded completely unconstitutional power to decide the amount of currency, establish the value of the currency, set the interest rates, create booms and busts, and so on. The Federal Reserve is the brainchild of Edward Mandell House. Right? Edward Mandell House, President Wilson's top advisor. He wrote in his own 1912 book, Philip Drew, Administrator, that he was working for socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. He said that in his book. Right? He later founded the Council on Foreign Relations. Right? I think he's probably the arch conspirator of the 20th century. The Federal Reserve was actually conceived at a secret meeting held in Jekyll Island, Georgia in 1910. And in 1910, 7 men traveled all the way down there to this plush resort, actually a summer home. I think it was J.P. Morgan's summer place. And they put together the plans to have the Federal Reserve created. Edward Mandell House wasn't there, but one man that was there was a man named A. Piatt Andrew. He was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Now, if you ever go to Gloucester, you know that when you get to Gloucester, if you continue down Route 128, you go over a bridge. You go over the estuary. And you'll look on your left as you're going into Gloucester, you look on your left and you'll see the bridge is named for A. Piatt Andrew. So Gloucester had its representative there. Not only that, but Edward Mandell House had a summer home in Gloucester. And his summer home in Gloucester is where Franklin Roosevelt went in 1932 after he got the nomination of the Democratic Party. He went to visit with Edward Mandell House in 1932 and took office in 1933. The Federal Reserve Bill was being proposed in Congress. There were a few who saw the danger. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, Sr. of Massachusetts, said, "This bill as it stands seems to me to open the way to a vast inflation of the currency." Good for him. Charles Lindbergh Sr., the father of the famous aviator, was a congressman from Minnesota. In 1913, he said, "This new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation." By 1968, the head of the House Banking Committee was a congressman from Texas, a Democrat, named Wright Patman. And Wright Patman said, "In the United States today, we have in effect two governments. We have the duly constituted government, then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve." But there wasn't anything he could do about it. Now, you can go to the internet and you can ask to see the United States national debt clock. And the figures will come up. So I went to it the other day, and this was June 24th of 2008, the national debt clock. And I have copies of this. I'm going to let everybody have a copy of this. The national debt stands at $9,374,570,800,000, or whatever, you know. Right? In other words, 9.3 trillion. That's 12 zeros. The U.S. population is 304 million. So therefore, each citizen's share of the admitted national debt is $30,813. No wonder a baby cries when he's born. The national debt climbs at approximately 1.36 billion per day. Per day. Interest alone on the national debt, fiscal year 2007, soaked the American people $430 billion, about $1,400 for every man, woman, and child, just for interest on the accumulated debt. But the true indebtedness of the United States government, if you add in unfunded obligations into the future, Social Security, Medicare, and so forth, that there's no money for, then you approach $50 trillion. This enormous debt should stimulate another application of the "No Child Left Behind" slogan. And yet, my friends, our leaders congratulate themselves as they give away tens of billions every year through the variety of foreign aid programs. Now, if you went to a fourth grader and said, "Look, you're heavily in debt, should you give away money?" what do you think the fourth grader would say? He'd say no. We need a fourth grader in the White House. We need fourth graders in Congress. Okay? I have a copy here of the Communist Manifesto. And if you go to page 25, you see the famous 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. Number 2, a heavy progressive income tax. Number 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. That's the Federal Reserve. There's one change. Here, it's not the state, it's a private. Private. Right? But Karl Marx would be completely satisfied with what is being done. Now, we've all filled out an income tax return. We've all filled out, I got a little heading here is right off the income tax return. Let's talk about some income tax facts. First is Karl Marx wanted it. He wanted income tax. Second is the income tax accounts for 40% of government revenue. Where does the rest come from? Well, the rest comes from excise taxes and other kinds of taxes, corporation taxes and so forth, and also borrowing. If abolished today, if you abolish the income tax today, government spending would revert to 1997. That's how fast it's growing. Abolishing the income tax, however, without reducing a great deal of government spending would only bring on more debt, more inflation, or both. The Internal Revenue Service, that is the partner of the income tax, of course, with its police-like powers, is effectively a people control agency. I think that aspect of it is more important than the money that they collect. People fear an IRS audit and do not speak out against government wrongs because of the police power of the IRS. I'm not giving you good news here, am I?
No.
All right, so let's kind of pull it all together. Let's analyze this situation. I see only three alternatives. Our leaders are either stupid, or they're totally ignorant of what's happening and are trying their best, or there's a design. I don't see any other alternatives. But I don't believe our leaders are stupid. I don't believe they're ignorant of the facts. Facts have a way of being very disturbing. Therefore, I don't think it's unreasonable at all to conclude that there is a design behind what is occurring. And ladies and gentlemen, design equals conspiracy. And a conspiracy can be defined very simply as a plot among more than one person for an evil purpose. More than one person, evil, and secret. In 1968, a man named James Lucier, a fellow I know, he wrote something in the John Birch Society's position, the whole of stuff that we've published. And he wrote what I consider to be one of the more brilliant lines I've ever read. He said, the first job of conspiracy is to convince the world that conspiracy does not exist. The first job is to convince the world that there isn't. So you approach somebody and you'll be accused of it being a conspiracy theorist. You're one of those. James Lucier explained why this very good word has become such a lightning rod for so many people. The first job of a conspiracy is to convince the world that conspiracy does not exist. Well, we got a little help recently from a fellow named David Rockefeller. He wrote a book called Memoirs, put it out in 2003. And in the book, he wrote one paragraph that you're going to hear over and over again now, almost as much as you've heard Richard N. Carter talk about an end run around national sovereignty. David Rockefeller said, some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. There it is, page 405. Now, notice he used the word conspiring. Okay? See, you people are accusing me of conspiring. And then he goes on and he says, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. Well, David, thank you. That's going to be helpful. All right, so I haven't given you much good news here, have I? The dollar is shrinking in value, you all know that. The Federal Reserve is just whatever it pleases to do. Just consider that even a slight nod or a wink by the Federal Reserve chairman sets all kinds of things in motion. Right? People sell, people buy. Right? And if you know ahead of time what he's going to do with his nod or his wink, you can probably cash in before anybody else does. Has that ever been done? Yes, it has. Yes, it has. In fact, I've talked about that in a book I wrote. You'll find much of what I've talked about here in my book, Financial Terrorism, which I certainly recommend. So how do we defeat this enemy? And is it an enemy? Yes, it is. It's an enemy of freedom. It's an enemy of our personal wealth. It's an enemy of everything we stand for. It's an enemy of the Constitution and so on. So how do we go about defeating it? And the answer is this: no debate. Debate with these people, you provide them undeserved dignity.
Right.
If it's simply a debate, then both sides have a point of view and it's okay. Both of them have merit. No, I don't debate. What about books and pamphlets countering all these falsehoods? Well, they're good. They're good, but they're not enough. The enemy is not an ideology in which men believe. It's a conspiracy in which men participate. If you fight it as an ideology, you're playing their game. So what do you do when you're faced with a conspiracy? You expose it. You expose it, and you expose those who are its perpetrators. You do it carefully. You have to realize that many of those involved in this conspiracy are not themselves conspirators, but just go along to get along types. Lenin once said of communism, he said, communism must be built with non-communist hands. Yeah, right. Similarly, the conspiracy David Rockefeller referred to has to be built with non-conspiratorial but self-serving hands. And it is. It is being built with them. There aren't many conspirators. Many will break free of the conspiracy's lures when the plot is exposed. Actually, the conspiracy is a house of cards needing courageous Americans to bring about its collapse. That's why we have a John Birch Society. In 1975, Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society, said, "There is a conspiracy at work as sure as there is a law of gravity. And to try to overcome its effects by ignoring its existence is exactly the kind of opposition that the conspiracy has contrived and created for itself. So, we stand solidly on our position that the only way to stop this conspiracy is to expose it." He said that in 1975, and of course he had said that over and over again, but that particular quote just fit what I wanted to use. And at the end of the foundation of the John Birch Society in 1958, Robert Welch said, "Come join us in our proud companionship and in our epic undertaking." And that's where we are. Now we're at a position where there are a lot of people who have come to an awareness of many realities. The Ron Paul movement during the year of, well, he started in 2007, really, 2008, has brought an awful lot of people to a great awareness. But even those people are not allowed to understand that there is a conspiracy. They're going to fight it on ideological lines, as does Ron Paul himself. He's always talking about the concepts of liberty, and that's good. And I believe in every one of them. Right? But I also believe that what is being done to us isn't happening by chance. It isn't being done by stupid or ignorant people. It is being done by deliberate treachery. Just imagine a foreign aid program when you're $9 trillion in debt. Yeah. Right? How much further do you have to go with anybody? Do you think Congressman Tierney and Congressman Markey, do you think they're stupid? We all know now that we're fighting gasoline prices. My friends, the gasoline price of $4 is where it should be when you figure out how many of these are floating around. Yeah. And it's going to go higher because there are more of these floating around. It's where it should be. But as I started, I said that this will get you a quart of gasoline and this will get you 12 quarts of gasoline, and they both say $1. Incredible. You will run into people in the Ron Paul movement who are alerted. They're interested. They want to know. Reach out, grab them, and tell them, look, we're fighting a conspiracy. Keep in mind the three alternatives: stupidity, ignorance, or design. Can anybody suggest a fourth alternative? I can't think of any. Right?
All of the above.
Right. So, well,
All the above.
all of the above.
It's the fourth choice.
Well, now you're talking about your congressman. The United States could be independent in production of oil and natural gas. We have tremendous quantities offshore that are locked up. We have Alaska with the tremendous quantities that are known there in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Congressman Edward Markey, who used to represent Wakefield, but now we got Tierney and it doesn't matter. But Congressman Edward Markey introduced a bill in 2007 to make permanent the barring of offshore and Alaska development of resources. To make permanent. And he has 140 co-sponsors. I think we ought to publish the names of those and let the people go after them.
I think so. That would be good.
Ron Paul has introduced a bill to let us completely do the other way. And so far, he has no co-sponsors. But I think he will, because he has just started. And it's late in the session, it's late in the year, and they're talking about, well, we got to worry about that for 2009 and the next Congress and so forth. So, there's what I think. What I think is that the John Birch Society is the answer. Nobody else is willing to call it what it is. It is a conspiracy. I promised a copy of the national debt clock and some of the figures there about what your children owe, what you owe, and how bad it's getting, and I'll pass these out. So, thank you very much. You can have the paper one.
Okay, I'll take that better than nothing, although it's becoming almost nothing. We do want to recommend a book that Mr. McManus wrote, back to what, 95, 96, called Financial Terrorism. This is a lot of what he said at the podium today is in this book, a lot of the timeless things he mentioned about inflation and what happened. So I recommend that. Also, our campers at our summer camp program get a course called Economics 101, and we hand out this little thing about the roots of money. So hopefully all of you will take this, and if you do, you'll know as much as our campers know. At the very least. What's that program? What is it? What an 8-year-old knows, or what a fourth grader knows, and what have you. So please take some of these, and I just want to pass them out here. Just to recap, our next meeting won't be until September. It'll be the last Friday in September, and you'll be notified of that. And by the way, you're always welcome to invite guests. And if you get my email, forward to other like-minded people, or even if they're not like-minded and need to become like-minded. That's the problem we face here. We have a number of events coming up in the next few months here in the area. July 4th, the Boston Common. If you can help out with that, see me about that. I'm not sure where we're going to have our table, but probably by the Park Street Church on that side, I'm not quite sure. July 1st at Bob's Restaurant in Tuesday evening.
Early bird.
The Early Bird Cafe, 7 o'clock. It's going to be a presentation. We're going to show the overview of America, half-hour DVD on a projector. Do we have a screen? Do we need a screen?
I think that's taken care of.
Okay, bring your screen. I have a projector. And it's also part of the meetup, so hopefully we'll get some people who have just joined our meetups. And by the way, if you have internet access, I say most of you do, please join one of the local meetups, the John Birch Society, Greater Boston, or Central Massachusetts, or the Massachusetts, or join all of them, Merrimack Valley as well, or join all of them. Because I know when we get new people coming to the meetup site, if they see 10 to 12 people, not as exciting if they see 50 or 60 people. So there's no cost to it, so join up. And also suggest a meetup. That's really what we know. We're going to be successful with these meetups when others than people than Bill McNally and I are suggesting meetups. The whole idea is to get people doing things and doing all kinds of different events. What else do we have going on? Oh yes, August, I believe it's the 23rd. It's a Saturday up in Jaffrey. There's some type of Patriot rally going on, and we're going to be participating in that too. And I'll have some more information. I just got word of it very recently. And there's supposed to be a number of people there. It's like an all-day event, and there's going to be musters and reenactments and all that good stuff. And they asked us to be there, this gentleman was sponsoring it. So, by the way, we are getting a lot of invitations to speak at different events when we have. I'm speaking to a Republican Ladies Club in Nashua, thanks to Gene Notter. And John McManus is speaking in South Dakota, July 4th. They're expecting between 2,000 and 3,000 people. That's almost the whole state, in fact. So, it's all because of the outreach that many of you in this room are participating in. That's how more people see us on YouTube. They see our programs. A lot of our people are reaching out to the Ron Paul meetups, and that's how we're going to grow, and that's how we're going to win. So with that, I want to thank you all, and if you haven't paid for your lunch, you can pay me before you leave, please. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
No, not yet. I met somebody.